What's up, you guys? Welcome to episode 350 of the Established Run NBA podcast. I'm Mike Gallagher with the triumphant return of Drew Dinkmeyer on the podcast feed and back for some DFS shows and injury shows.
I will say, as we talk through some of these teams that have like early returns on the trade deadline and how they're adapting to their new pieces, I will say I feel a little bit behind and a little bit out of rhythm. I'm still kind of catching reps on some of these new teams, new situations, as I was completely disconnected from NBA during the wedding time. So from basically February 6th till the All-Star break, I just didn't catch any basketball. Saw some of the notifications with trades and stuff, but if we did a who he play for during the break, I would have been really lost. So I'm still getting my feet wet. Excited to talk hoops with you as always, Mike.
I miss a day of NBA and I'm like lost. So I couldn't imagine, especially during deadline. That's so hard. But yeah, as you mentioned, we're going to talk early returns on deadline. We did do a little bit about the Mavs early, but we'll kind of hit them again here. Wanted to get your thoughts there. But let's start with the Knicks. They were kind of the winners here with the big Bojan Bogdanovic trade and then picking up Alec Burks, getting rid of Quentin Grimes. But they were kind of the big winners. And the early returns haven't been great in their last and since the trade. They're 22nd in net rating, fifth worst defense. But to me, honestly, the most stunning thing to me from our perspective, where we're doing DFS, fantasy, and betting, they are so slow. They're sub 90 pace since the trade. Only two teams are below 96. So they are in terrible game environments. They're not assisting any passes. They're under 50% on assisted baskets, last in assist to turnover ratio. So honestly, the headline to me is like, what an ugly brand of basketball that they're playing, and they're not really like winning. Their defense is really slipped. That's probably more of a product of Isaiah Hartenstein missing games. But what have you been seeing from the Knicks in these last couple games that we've been able to catch them?
Yeah, so the Knicks are a team I'm close to, living in New York, and have a lot of friends who are big time Knicks fans, and they're one of the teams that I would say that I thought they did a really good job at the trade deadline. Really like the acquisition of Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic in terms of just kind of stretching out the depth of their roster that was much needed. But this is a team that was really limping into the All-Star break in a big way. Obviously, it first started with the injury to Julius Randle. And I guess it really first started with the injury to OG Anunoby, and then Julius Randle. And losing those two key pieces really kind of threw the rotation into flux. They hung on for a little bit there where they were kind of hanging in and playing decent basketball, but then the wheels kind of spun off towards the end. And I think you could look at this as, maybe it's adjusting to new pieces on the roster and the rotation, but you highlighted a few things there that I think signals more just guys were worn out. They were just playing so many minutes like leading up into the deadline. They were running 7 or 8 man rotations because they just didn't have enough bodies healthy that Tom Thibodeau trusted. And so it was important to get those extra bodies in there, but then there's going to be an acclimation period as well. So playing slow, I think that's because they couldn't afford to play fast. They had guys playing too many minutes out there, and just naturally, certainly they lost some of the quickness and speed they were playing with the trade out of Emmanuel Quickley and RJ Barrett, and losing some athleticism there. But I think it's more a byproduct of just guys playing exhausted and playing tired. And so I'm interested to see how that changes as they get more acclimated here. I still think they're going to play slow generally because they're kind of a veteran-laden team. They trust themselves in the half court with what Jalen Brunson's able to create for them. And I think that will ultimately help them in the playoffs. But certainly this recent stretch has kind of taken them out of the conversation of elevating all the way up to like the 2 seed that we had talked about before in terms of, the Knicks coming and having aspirations to get up there. They're now 4 games back of Cleveland. That's a lot to make up at this stage in the season. They could still potentially get to the 3 seed, but they're 2.5 games back in Milwaukee there. So I think they're settling back into around where you would have expected them to be coming into the season. I think ultimately this trade will bring big dividends, but I think it's just come at a time where they simply were just trying to kind of stay afloat. And you mentioned the defense and the impact of Isaiah Hartenstein being injured. We talked about the first injury at the center position that they dealt with Mitchell Robinson, and how the downgrade to Isaiah Hartenstein in terms of the depth and the issues and the trickle-down effect, how that might hamper them. Well, then Hartenstein gets hurt, and he's on severe minutes limits when he comes back. And Precious Achiuwa has done a decent job kind of filling in, and we thought that was a good acquisition to get some additional big man depth. But, man, they really do miss that defensive anchor. And so I think a lot of this is just a lot of injuries kind of piling up at the wrong time for the Knicks, them playing through a bit of an exhausted stretch. Hopefully the break helps them reset a little bit. But certainly I don't mistake their recent results for specifically the results of the trade deadline. I think the two things are, it came at a time where they just happened to be really depleted from a roster perspective.
Yeah, and you mentioned Precious Achiuwa just being, he's been their most valuable piece they traded for, and it's probably not even close. He hasn't been like impactful to winning, but the amount of just being a minutes eater, that's been huge. We're seeing like touch 40s kind of like with regularity. Hasn't been so much the last couple because they've got bodies back, as you mentioned. But he's been, he was kind of just an ancillary piece in that OG trade, and he's been really, really helpful to fill the minutes without Julius Randle, who is a minutes eater himself. But it's kind of odd to see Bojan, who was really the crown jewel besides OG, but around the deadline, he was one of the best pieces. They got him pretty cheap. Hasn't really been too impactful. Like, he's got some important closing minutes here and there, but he's not like in pen. He's closing. We haven't seen him start. Do you think that Bojan could maybe hop in there, maybe move Precious back to the bench or something along those lines, maybe play bigger, move Dante DiVincenzo out of the starting lineup, make Harder too? Is there any sort of starting lineups with Bojan that you could maybe elevate and find minutes that way?
I think there's the potential for that to happen. But as we saw with the acquisition of Precious Achiuwa, in the first few weeks that Tom Thibodeau was kind of getting accustomed to him, Precious Achiuwa wasn't playing very much, right? It kind of took him time. And I would say that Precious Achiuwa, similar to Bojan Bogdanovic, is probably a little bit better known for their offensive contributions than their defensive contributions. And so I think for Tom Thibodeau, if you want to earn minutes right away, the way that he's going to trust you the most is if you're giving strong defensive effort, you're knowing what you're doing on the rotations, and you're kind of really locked in on that end. And I think for both of those players, that's not where they naturally start to add value right away. So I think it took Precious some time to earn Tom Thibodeau's trust. I think it will take Bojan some time to earn Tom Thibodeau's trust. And in this case, with the guys that Bojan's competing with, to potentially, usurp and overtake some of those minutes, it's guys that Tom Thibodeau really trusts on the defensive end of the floor. We're talking about Josh Hart, eventually OG Anunoby. I think those are going to be tougher guys for him to usurp in terms of Tom Thibodeau's trust tree. But I do think there's, paths for Bojan, certainly these like high teens, low 20s minutes. I don't think that's the long-term route. I think the long-term, maybe in the playoffs, but I think the long-term route for regular season is more like 24 to 26. And I think he'll work his way up there over time.
Yeah. And then getting OG's really the whole story here. They were really running good on defense. They were, in Wolves territory, Cavs territory for the first month. They had OG before he went down with the elbow injury, and he's first in the NBA in on-off defensive rating. With they just play such great defense when he's on the court, so they need him back. But yeah, I mean, the fact that we were all giving them A grades, I saw some A+ grades. We thought they hit it out of the park, but I don't know. I don't know, because we never really see Bojan be that impactful. Like for even the Pistons team, they've been pretty bad. We know Brooks has some big minutes, so a little surprising to see not a big impact. And should mention though, to be fair, I mean they played Boston. They're the hottest team in the NBA. At Philly, that was their one win. At Houston's not an easy game. They play slow. They're good at taking away easy stuff. And then the Pacers. So their schedule's been pretty tough for the stretch where they've. So a little bit of a grain of salt there.
They get 7 of their next 8 at home. And while the schedule is against, pretty quality teams on the whole, just having 7 of your next 8 at home should correct some of this. Getting started with tonight against Detroit at home, you would think that's a very winnable game. And then they play New Orleans on the second night of back-to-back, Golden State at home on Thursday. At Cleveland is their one road game, then Atlanta at home, Orlando at home, Philadelphia, before a West Coast trip. That's a 4-game West Coast trip. So I think this is a time to get right. But ultimately, the reason that I think everybody loved the trades at the trade deadline were the team is bleeding depth, and we knew this was an issue. They were playing like Charlie Brown Jr. and Jacob Toppin and these guys who are really borderline NBA talents. So just getting that extra talent in the door, helping them kind of maintain and sustain right now. Because ultimately, I think if you're in the Knicks position, your goal is you want home court in the first round. You want a Game 7 if it needs to take place to happen at Madison Square Garden in the first round. And you've got a bunch of teams on your heels now after this little lull in production. So I think all of the trade deadline for them, for me, was about just trying to maintain through the regular season the best they can, and then insurance policies on if Julius Randle is unable to return this year for a playoff run. Then you have more insurance policies in terms of some of the offense that Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic can bring. But if they have Julius Randle back come playoff time, Alec Burks and Bojan Bogdanovic, these are going to be very small pieces in the grand scheme of things for what the Knicks are trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and you mentioned, getting the 4 seed, being home court. We talked about them maybe climbing up to the 2, as you mentioned. Probably unlikely with the Cavs, getting healthy again. And they just really held their own while they were shorthanded with Mobley and Garland. And she mentioned the Bucks have kind of righted the ship. Their defense has been vastly improved from where they were. Not saying much, but their offense has kind of fallen off a little bit. Where did they kind of stack up? They're 2.5 back on the Bucks, and then 3.5 on the Cavs, and then Sixers, who are falling like a rock here, a stone, or whatever the saying is. They're probably safe from them. But the Pacers are kind of coming too. They're on a 3-game win streak. Really nice win for them against Dallas. We'll talk about Dallas in a second. How do they kind of stack up for where you think they could slot in at the end of the season?
Yeah, I think a few weeks ago, Knicks fans' eyes were certainly above them in terms of who they could potentially catch in the standings. I think the gaze has turned beyond them in terms of who's potentially chasing them. And you look at in the immediate rear view mirror, there's 4 teams, right, that are within 3 games in the loss column. Philadelphia is 1 back, Indiana 2 back, Miami 2 back, and Orlando 1 back. And I think those to hold home court, you have to hold off all of them. And that's going to be a challenge, holding off all of them. I think they'd be favored individually against all of them, but holding off the collective group is going to be a challenge. I think that's where their attention is. I think Milwaukee will continue to play better. We've seen this with teams that are just very, very talented. There's always a learning curve, an adaptation period. We saw it with the Clippers, and they kind of settled in. I would expect that to happen for Milwaukee as well. And I think, from New York's perspective, I think the 2 teams you're going to be keeping an eye on are more Indiana and Miami, Orlando. As I think Miami is a team you keep a little bit more of an eye on if you're a Knicks fan, especially given the history of those 2 franchises. But I think those are the teams you're going to keep an eye on. Philadelphia right now, with an unknown timetable on Joel Embiid's potential return, they just look like a shell of themselves. So I think it's really, you're looking at Indiana and Miami, and can you continue to hold those teams off? And I think New York will. I think ultimately they'll finish as the 4th seed in the East.
Yep, I'm pretty much with you. I think they'll be fine. And should just mention Jalen Brunson's on a tear. He's having a huge February. He's averaging 32 per games this month here, and he'll probably add to that against the Pistons today as we're recording this on Monday morning/afternoon. Monday morning my time, Monday afternoon your time. So any other final bullet points that you want to hit with this Knicks team? Hartenstein also minutes should be trending up. I think it's going to really help them. He's been really helpful for them.
Yeah, and it's the one thing that, there's still, you can always kind of find defensive bigs at points in the buyout market that can give you 10 to 15 minutes a night. We saw that with Bismack Biyombo. Kind of, he every year seems to be available around the buyout market. So we'll see if there's anybody else left. They have not participated in that market for now, but Hartenstein's health is a really big deal. And there was a report before the break that Mitchell Robinson could potentially return this year, which was a positive report, because that just having the extra body would be a really, really big difference. And I know they're comfortable, Tibbs is comfortable with Jericho Sims in terms of being able to slot him in, but ultimately he's probably the same as anyone you'd get in the buyout market, but ultimately they need to get to a point where they've got at least 28 to 30 minutes from someone of the caliber of Hartenstein or Mitch Robinson at the center spot. Otherwise their defense just takes a big hit without OG.
Yep, and then they're getting those guys back. They're starting to do more on-court work and all that good stuff too. So definitely the trending in the right. It's again just a tough schedule. Home court will definitely help them. So let's shift gears to the Dallas Mavericks. They were red hot, but Indy they played one of their worst games of the year. PJ Washington played terrible. We'll get to him in a second, but just some overall, we saw them switch to the starting lineup with Luka, Kyrie, Josh Green, PJ Washington, and Derek Lively back from injury. Only 27 minutes of that lineup, but it's actually crushed. Plus 51 per 100 in net rating. The Gafford starting lineup was actually not doing very well. They were minus 22.4. Again, small sample, 27 minutes, but some big wins. They had, arguably hashtag biggest win of the year to beat the Suns. in their opener after the break, not only for that win with the rivalry they have, but that gives them the tiebreaker over the Suns. They've got 2-1 seriously. I think that was just a massive, massive win for them. Earlier when we were doing the pod, we were talking about how I thought that they were like the Vegas was lining them, or sportsbook were lining them like locks. They were like minus 270 to make the playoffs. I actually took a position against it. I took plus 320 for them not to make the playoffs. But yeah, early returns, just to set you up a little more. So PJ, just really quick, PJ was bad yesterday. He turned the ball over 4 times. He was fumbling around. His defense wasn't very good. But they're asking so much of him. He's guarded Pascal Siakam, Kevin Durant, SGA. They're asking him to guard like the best player, which is quite stunning. And then we got great minutes out of Gafford out of the gate, but he's also kind of cool, which we kind of expected. But what have you been seeing so far from PJ Washington and Daniel Gafford and their impacts on this Dallas Mavericks team?
Yeah, and just to rehash your idea of betting them to miss the playoffs and whatnot, any team that gets in this Western Conference play-in situation is going to be vulnerable to missing the playoffs. And so if you can get them at long odds and they end up in the play-in, that's the important part, right? Obviously, if they don't end up in the play-in, they're in the playoffs and you lose the bet. But if they're in the play-in, you're looking at just, can they lose 2 games essentially to New Orleans, Lakers, Phoenix, Golden State, whoever kind of ends up in there alongside them. But in terms of Dallas, I think the thing that was surprising to me, certainly when I came back to return, was to find out how well they had been playing defensively. And if you look at kind of when I last, was covering NBA for us, February 5th was basically kind of the last day that I turned over the reins to the team here. And they played a really good game, a road win in Philadelphia at that point. Then they go road win in Brooklyn, road win in New York, throttle Oklahoma City at home by 35. Then take care of Washington at home, take care of San Antonio at home, go into the break on that good momentum of taking care of the bad teams, doing what you need to do. But kind of in the rear view mirror was that 35-point blowout win against OKC, where it looked more like the kind of way you would expect Dallas to potentially blow teams out, which is just like offensive firepower, right? They score 146 points in that game. Luka and Kyrie combined to go 20 for 33, combined for 57 points. They shoot 15 for 38 from 3, 40% for the game, and they just kind of dominate offensively. The defensive stuff has been interesting to me to see it be so successful early on, because you would think kind of changing out Grant Williams for PJ Washington based on who those 2 players have been historically would not be something that would improve the defense. And so that's something that was really surprising to me, that it was working in that way early on. And I'm interested to see if that continues. In terms of what they did at the deadline as a whole and how I felt about it, the big thing for me was kind of getting to the point that you could play 40 plus minutes of having a pick and roll partner out there for Luka Doncic at all times that challenges the rim with verticality. They had that with Lively. They've been really successful when they've had Lively on the floor. And so getting Gafford and allowing them to have 2 of those guys and shifting Maxi Kleber back to more of the traditional, he's a 4, but he's a 5 in an emergency situation when we want to play small, and that allows him to guard all kind of the big wing scorers. That all fit and made a lot of sense to me. The PJ Washington kind of Grant Williams swap, I was surprised by, but Grant wasn't fitting. It wasn't working out really well. And Grant can be a polarizing personality at times. So I wondered if there were other things there as well in terms of fit that just weren't working out as well. So I was surprised that they traded more defense for more offense, just based on how my impression of those 2 players was. But then in the early returns, it looked really good defensively. So I think things are largely looking good for Dallas. Remember, most of this season, they've had to play with the offensive burden entirely on Luka's shoulders. They're getting Kyrie back healthy. We'll see how long that lasts. But just having somebody to eat up some of the offensive possessions and not have Luka have to go out there and play 44 minutes a game with a 40+% usage rate, I think will have a lasting impact in terms of their ability to be successful in the playoffs. The West is going to be a gauntlet. It's going to be really, really challenging to get through. So, you stack them up against some of the other high-end West teams, and I still am not so sure. But obviously the way Luka plays basketball is built for the playoffs. So it's encouraging to see them be able to defend a little bit. I question it. I'm still skeptical, but I do think getting some additional size, and especially having a roll man that's on the floor and challenging the rim vertically with Luka and pick and roll, is going to make offense even easier for them going forward.
And then with the center depth, one interesting adjustment that Jason Kidd made in that Suns game. I'm going to reference the Suns game a couple times because it was so big. They went small. They went Maxi Kleber at the 5, and I thought that was a pretty big difference. I thought that was what separated, what kind of locked up the game. And we've seen that the Suns have had really a hard time with that small ball. Is kind of the reason why they lost that series. With the 5-out offense there. So he has that in his bag. They've got, a lot of optionality in how they could play things. And PJ at the 5, I don't think we've seen too much of it. I think we saw like spot minutes, but not like significant closing with it. They just go to Kleba there. And then they do go to Derek Lively. Derek Lively's still coming back from the nasal fracture, but really just the amount of options he has to kind of be like a chameleon for how they want to play defensively. Whether it's with a drop big or with switchability stuff. And we'll see how looking at their schedule, they're going to have to really mix it up because they're at Cleveland, Toronto doesn't matter, at Boston, Philly, Indy, Miami.
They have a lot more road games too. They have a lot more road games and home games the rest of the way as well. The schedule is tough for Dallas the rest of the way, which is why betting against them to make the playoffs I thought was interesting, certainly. I will say they look like they have a very solid 9 now, which I think all season long they were sort of at, if we've got Kyrie, we got 8 that we feel pretty good about. And then we're trying to figure it out between Dwight Powell and Jaden Hardy. And we'll see if Omax Prosper develops into that. And Dante Exum has been the guy that kind of filled that for a period of time. And then he got hurt again. And so that it's a situation where they feel like they have a more solid 9 now that they can kind of depend on and have more consistency in the rotations as well. Pending health, obviously, is always the case with Kyrie and the rest of the Dallas team here. But I see a little bit clearer of a path where before the path ultimately for them in the playoffs was like, man, how much can Luka and Kyrie carry? And can they get just enough defensively to kind of make it work? And I didn't see enough defensively. I still question that side if they have enough in the playoffs. But we know half-court offense, like they can go out there and score with Kyrie and Luka. Those are 2 half-court offenses unto themselves.
Yeah, and I mean, just talk about like known quantities, right? Like Luka, pretty much known. He's been banged up. They had the ankle, that left quad, that left calf thing has been bothering him. You mentioned Kyrie. He's been playing awesome. 65 true shooting since they made the trades. But can he stay healthy? Josh Green's been a little inconsistent. I think Maxi Kleber is fairly known quantity. This dislocated toe thing has been really been a pain. He's been missing a lot of time with that. But yeah, PJ's been all over the place. He was a guy who was a pretty good catch and shoot guy earlier in his career. If he could kind of be that guy, that could be really valuable to them. But yeah, and then we're still waiting on Dante Exum to come back. He was playing awesome before us. But yeah, they've got, again, like nobody, like obviously their top 2 guys are really good, but if they kind of get hot, they're certainly dangerous. We know Luka in the playoffs is when they almost made the finals, despite running into the Warriors. I think they're dangerous. Like if I'm Western Conference team, although you could say this probably about most teams, I wouldn't want to play them. I wouldn't want to play the Lakers or the Warriors either. But they're pretty dangerous to me. So, but yeah, just going back to the trade, I was pretty high in it. I thought it was a pretty good fit just because I thought the Grant Williams thing just was a complete airball, and good on them for getting off that. But yeah, so like not as good as I thought for the trade impact, but still, I think they're better than they were, and I think giving up the first is fine.
Yeah, I think PJ is a more skilled offensive player than Grant Williams. So if he can replicate what Grant Williams is bringing to the table defensively this year, which was not as much impact as Dallas certainly hoped, then it's a net win from that perspective. And then Gafford over like Rashawn Holmes is going to be kind of a clear-cut win, just a better player at this stage in his career, even though Gafford has limitations. But right now for the regular season, Gafford going up against second units, providing insurance against the Derek Lively injury, which there's been plenty of this year. All of that makes sense. And for these teams, a lot of times at the trade deadline, it is true that it's very difficult to make trades that really distort the nature of a team's path from a playoff perspective, just because those players usually aren't available. There's very few situations where you'd say at the trade deadline, there's a transaction that is made that widely alters the team's future going forward from a playoff perspective. But it still matters the regular season getting through these last 25 to 30 games in terms of your positioning. We talked about it with the Knicks in terms of potentially getting home court. With Dallas, we're talking about trying to avoid the play-in, right? And there's basically, when you look at their positioning, there's 2 spots and there's 4 teams that are ultimately competing for those 2 spots for the 5th and 6th spot in the Western Conference. It's Sacramento, Phoenix, New Orleans and Dallas. And so can they get themselves out of the play-in? And that's ultimately the work that they're trying to do here. We'll see if they're able to. I would put them as a dog based on their remaining schedule, based on where they currently sit on the standings compared to those teams. But they certainly have improved the roster and given themselves a better chance at potentially getting out of that play-in.
Yeah, Kings playing well right now.
Yes.
Kind of hurts a lot of teams. We're not going to talk about them, but I want to shout them out. Just going back to PJ really quick. So I was looking at his 3-point percentage over his career. Just so starting with the 2020-2021 season, almost 39%. Next season, almost 37%. Next season, almost 35%. And then this year, it's like 32%, including 19% in this 5-game sample. He's been just like precipitous decline on this. Do you have any concern with that? That's so odd to see him drop like substantially year after year after year.
Yeah, I mean, this is why I was confused at kind of the acquisition as a whole. In PJ, the defensive tape he had put out was really, really poor before. I understand he's competed more on that end since the acquisition, but declining 3-point shooter who doesn't have a lot of positional versatility didn't strike me as a great defender. Now he's only 25, and he did flash those skills kind of early on. Mm-hmm. And he was a lottery pick. I mean, he's a talented guy. He can do different things on the floor offensively, but he kind of had gotten pigeonholed in Charlotte as kind of just a spot up 4, and he wasn't really filling that role great offensively. Now you play with Luka and Kyrie, you're just taking open jumpers. So, can we get that back up to the 38, 39, 40% range just because they're purely open jumpers and it's not the Charlotte situation where you're kind of getting contested all the time because nobody's creating as much gravity? Maybe. And that's the hope that Dallas is taking, I'm sure.
Yeah, and his block rates really dropped. That's more of a product of shift. He played a lot of center kind of in the middle of his career, and now he's playing like almost straight 4. So a little bit of that. But yeah, not great to be trending in that direction there. So yeah, playing the standings game, it sounds like we're kind of in the same boat. Like we're thinking. So the other reason why I made that bet, we talked a lot about the Warriors. I feel better that despite the games they have to make up, I think the Warriors, despite their loss, and as you mentioned, I heard the Draymond Green on my hike this morning, giving him hell. Like, God, what a great Joker game. But I don't know. I still believe in the Warriors. I still think the Lakers have a shot. I'm kind of in on the Pelicans. I like how they're playing despite this 2-game losing streak that they had. Suns, obviously, I still believe, and we'll talk about them in a second. Mentioned the Kings playing well, Clippers are in. So I kind of feel better about them. I don't know. Just always nervous that something happens to the Mavs. Like if Luka or Kyrie go down, I don't feel that great about their backcourt depth being able to survive because, like, obviously Hardy was out of the rotation last game, but sounds like you're kind of in the same boat.
Yeah, their roster build has always kind of been thin, right? So it's always been really, really heavily dependent on Luka, and since they turned what has been Kristaps Porzingis into now Kyrie Irving, since they've done that, it's always been a very top-heavy roster build. So that always is very fragile to seasonal building, and especially with what Luka's had to, withstand so far this year in terms of what he's had to carry. You always wonder if that's going to add up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so let's talk about the Suns. Just mentioned them. The Royce O'Neal trade, they didn't give up much to get him, but we talked about them needing a 3-4 who can guard. It could be a bit of a connector. Royce O'Neal's passing has been pretty underrated by people who maybe don't follow him too closely. He's been pretty good at making the right play, hitting open shots. He was obviously really impactful from the Utah days, still a pretty good player and a good offense with the Nets when he was there. He's coming on here. We saw him have pretty big impact. We saw him play a ton early. Got the start yesterday, obviously, in a big win. Guarded LeBron a pretty good bit. They needed that win against the Lakers there. But so you got him. We can talk about Bol in a second. But what have you been seeing? And just to set up some more stuff here, in the last 5, they're 12th in net rating. They've been kind of meh. That loss to the Rockets was really tough. We could talk a little bit about that. But any early Suns returns you're seeing from Royce O'Neal? Obviously, the headline here is Bradley Beal has to get back on the court. But yeah, Royce O'Neal, Bol, if you want to go there, what have you been seeing from their recent front court additions?
I think the big thing for the Suns that we talked about kind of coming into the season and the question mark around them was ultimately how are they going to be able to fill out the roster around Booker, Beal, Durant, and then Nurkic. They turned Ayton into Nurkic essentially, and like what else could they kind of build around that? And we knew it would take time. We thought towards the end of the offseason, getting Eric Gordon, getting Grayson Allen. I thought those were two really good moves that helped stabilize things. We were hopeful in guys like Nasir Little or Keita Bates-Diop and kind of filling these roles. They didn't really end up coming to fruition. And so, they found stuff with Eric Gordon and with Grayson Allen that I think has helped. Now, hopefully what they're trying to find is, Royce O'Neal. Does that work? They took the offseason swing on Bull, who it's taken time for him to kind of earn his way into playing time. He's a very talented player. He had a brief run last year with Orlando that was really compelling and really interesting. Can he make a run like that this year that helps in the regular season? But from a playoff basketball standpoint, right? Like now you look at, you've got KD, Beal, Booker, Nurkic, Gordon, Grayson Allen, Royce O'Neal. We're at 7 guys that you feel pretty good about can be in a playoff rotation now. You really want to get that to 8 or 9, ideally. Even though in the playoffs you can play 7 or 8, you want to be able to have different pieces on the chessboard that you can mix and match. And so they're getting closer and closer. The hope is that between Thaddeus Young, Drew Eubanks, Bull, you can kind of piece together that backup center spot. Maybe learn to play in different combinations in different ways. Maybe with KD smaller as well, but all of this depends on them being healthy. And Bradley Beal immediately gets hurt again and is out the first 2 games after the break. And so this is the question mark: is ultimately like, can they get these 3 guys to be able to play together and healthy? Because we haven't had a great test of their team during the course of the season. They're 34-24. They're playing at a 59% winning clip while being shorthanded with one of these guys most of the year. So all the high expectations we had coming into the year on Bradley Beal being able to stay healthy and this team contending towards the very top of the Western Conference, we just haven't gotten much of a look at it. I thought they played really well yesterday against the Lakers, but I thought it was kind of a classic Lakers game where the Lakers weren't super engaged defensively, and then Phoenix kind of took the foot off the gas at times with effort and let the Lakers kind of come back into the game. And it's just with Phoenix, it's like, how serious are you as a playoff basketball team? And I'm still waiting to see that, because they do not play at a very serious level during the course of the regular season for 48 minutes. They usually take their foot off the gas at different spurts, and the games get back into control or out of control. And so I think Royce is a big help in terms of just adding a playoff caliber player that can floor space and also defend and bring some positional versatility. And you mentioned with Royce O'Neal, the passing. I think it's more the decision-making in that he moves the ball. When the ball comes to him, he knows what he's doing with it as it's on his way to him. He's either shooting it, or he's pump faking and passing, or he's passing right away. And that quick decision making and ball movement is something that really, really helps. We've talked about this before, but you look at all the elite offenses in the NBA, and they're going to be quick decision makers just generally in terms of the best offenses in the league. It's rare that you just have a team that has so much overwhelming offensive talent. I think Milwaukee's probably the best explanation of that, or best example of that, where it's like overwhelming offensive talent for Giannis and Dame, and so they're going to be great regardless. But the rest of the teams that like function at the highest level of offense in the NBA, they're quick decision makers. And I think Royce O'Neal fits that mold, even though he himself has limitations offensively.
Yeah, and I think just defensively, having a big wing that can guard, because Okogie's more of a guy who guards.
Yeah.
Obviously, Grayson's not a guy who's going to guard wings. I think that's really, really important. So I think that of all these trades we talked about, it's kind of crazy that the cost was so low, but this has gone really well. And I'm curious to see if he unseats Grayson, just because I think having a bigger wing, I think, is a little bit more useful. And we talked about PJ dropping. Royce, no. He's every year around 38, 39% and 3-point shooting. You just know what you're going to get. He's really durable, doesn't foul. Classic role player on a good team. So really like that. Any other guys you want to hit? Like Kevin Durant's been driving more. He's been like fine. He's been missing a lot of shots lately, and he's kind of talked about that. Booker's role just goes so ham. We took over on this just that we felt really good about with Beal out. And then should mention Bradley Beal was doing on-court work. The Suns are off till Thursday, so pretty good chance he's back. So their schedule is really hard. They have the hardest schedule going forward according to Positive Residual. So, and they've had the easiest schedule to this point. Yeah. So not good on the schedule there. But anything you want to add on KD and outlook on this team?
Yeah, more road games than home games down the stretch as well for them. I think ultimately we got to see them healthy. Hopefully, Bull, we get an extended crack at, because I do think he positionally can help solve some of the issues that they've had. One of the big issues that they've had is that they've just had no consistency at the backup 5 spot all year long. They've been rotating pieces around there trying to find an answer. And then Nurkic is not the most durable guy. They were able to get 35, 37 great minutes out of Nurkic yesterday. When that Nurkic shows up and like makes AD kind of look small, it's why we all get tantalized with what could be with Nurkic. The problem is this is like year 8 of use of Nurkic doing this stuff, and you just don't see it consistently. But the minutes without Nurkic on the floor have been a challenge during the course of the season. And one of the solutions to those potentially is, okay, what if we can get into some of these small ball lineups that they've really struggled with? You highlighted this, that Dallas kind of took them apart with these, but they got to get better at those. And whether it's KD or Bull with that kind of length and shot blocking potentially as the rim protection, and then you get a little positional size with Royce O'Neal in there, all of a sudden, okay, you've got some lineup combinations that might work here. So I'm interested to see over the next few weeks if Bull can make a run at giving them different lineup combinations and diversity that allows them to play different ways, because that would be really helpful as well. Right now, they only have one real way to play because they don't have enough wing depth to figure it out to play small. And that way that they're playing has been very dependent on the center spot, which is highly variant with their production that they get out of that spot this year.
Yep. And then, yeah, Bull we'll see if he can carry it out. We saw him first sub yesterday. We took an over on him. That was a nice early hit there. Did miss Eric Gordon. Eric Gordon's been pretty good. When Eric Gordon takes a bunch of shots, they usually win games too. So, yeah, I think that they, got their starting 5. Royce, if Bull could be a thing, that does so much for them. Just as you mentioned, to have an 8th or 9th guy you could kind of trust. But did want to highlight the minutes yesterday. 39 for Durant, 37 for Royce, 37 for Nurk. That is so much for Nurk. 38 for Grayson, 38 for Booker. I mean, this team just has no choice but to play these guys a ton of minutes. Their defense has been a lot better lately, so they're still in pretty good game environments. Just looking at the stats, I forgot to mention, I think I did, 12th in net rating. The last 5 I did mention that. So, yeah, where are we at here? I think that they'll be able to avoid the play-in. The schedule does suck. But getting Beal back, Beal's got to stop pulling his hamstrings, man. This is just too much. But yeah, where do they kind of stack up? I don't think they're catching the Clippers. It's gonna be a really tight. They actually hopped up to 5th from 8th yesterday, but the Kings getting a win leapfrogged them there. This is such a tight race here for 5, 6, 7, 8. Really, 5, 6. Good.
Yeah, I'm not super optimistic. Honestly, I mean, the schedule is really tough, and then you look at the Kings, who are playing really well of late. They've only played 25 home games so far this year. That's, I think, lowest in the NBA. And we know how effective the Kings have been, late in the beam since last year at home. So they've got a lot more home games kind of on their plate down the stretch here. And if Sacramento is able to kind of separate from having kind of that schedule advantage, then it's one spot between 3 teams with Phoenix, New Orleans, and Dallas. And you mentioned Phoenix already not having the tiebreaker with Dallas. Like, it starts to get difficult in those rosters. New Orleans is the one I trust most from a depth perspective. So I'm hesitant. I was really optimistic on Phoenix kind of coming into the year. Part of that was assuming that Bradley Beal would be able to shake off these missed games issues that he had in Washington that I attributed to them tanking or in kind of fluky injuries. It hasn't been the case this year. He hasn't been able to shake those off. So the lack of depth on this team and how vulnerable they are to like one injury makes me pretty hesitant, and would put them, to me, and Dallas a little bit behind New Orleans if handicapping this race down the stretch. And then I think Sacramento, who I normally wouldn't put ahead of those 2 teams, but I think the schedule advantage in terms of having so many more home games the rest of the way, I would lean towards them as avoiding the play-in right now.
Yeah, confirmed. They have the fewest home games to date. Minnesota 26, Orlando 26, #OurMagic, and Spurs 26. Everybody else has 2 more than them. So yeah, we turned in a little bit of a pro Kings here, but any other things you wanted to note? Just really quick, what a win last night, man. That was one of their best wins of the year. I thought Fox played great defense, and they really were able closing out. Just wanted to highlight the Kings. They were chanting "Light the Beam" with the Clippers and Clippers new uniforms. We want to do a segment on that. Paul George was wearing a sweat. I saw that. I was like, what's that logo he's wearing when he was sitting on the bench? And then the next day they announced it. So he kind of tipped it. But any Kings notes you wanted to add or anything? We'll probably talk OKC next week.
Yeah, I'm sure we'll get into more situations around the league. But I think this is going to be the Western Conference play-in situation is going to be one of the most intriguing ones to watch down the stretch here as these teams kind of try to avoid each other. But I mean, we are very likely heading to a situation in the play-in where Golden State and the Lakers are playing a elimination game in the play-in, which I cannot imagine a much better scenario from a ratings perspective than that situation. So I think this is real. I mean, you're going to get potentially one of Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, and the Golden State Warriors and LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Like, these are the play-in games in the Western Conference. My word, you've got some real big star potential that'll be really exciting this year, kind of setting the stage for the playoffs.
One last thing, is DNP rest off the table for all those teams? Like, you lose 2 games in a row, 3 games in a row, you're dropping from 5th to 8th, or that's like a huge deal. So these guys got to get their game counts and be really up there. Just anything
for those 4 teams, yes. Yeah. For the Lakers and Golden State, I think they're going to start to create a gap between. We'll see if the Lakers or Golden State can make a run in the next 2 weeks, essentially, where they can close that gap and get within 1 or 2 games in the loss column of someone in that level to be able to potentially usurp and get into the A spot, which is so valuable. But if not, I think those 2 teams will create separation from the Utah and the Houston range, and as a result, that's going to allow them to potentially know that they're going to go into, hey, we're stuck 8 or 9, one of the 2, or excuse me, 9 or 10, one of the 2 of us. But that's the situation. But to monitor. But those teams 5 through 8 currently, Sacramento, Phoenix, New Orleans, and Dallas, I think you're more likely to see them try to operate as if every game really, really counts.
Yeah, all the playing teams right now, Pels, Mavs, Lakers, and Warriors, are 7-3 or better over their last. They're all playing great. So it's going to be really hard. It's going to be hard if everyone's playing great. It's going to be hard to make up games. So, yeah, all right. Mostly going to do it there. Anything else you want to add to take us out of here?
No, as always, the best way to support us is by supporting the content channels that we're posting. So if you're checking this out on Spotify or iTunes, please consider leaving us a review and letting us know what you think of the podcast. If you're checking out our YouTube channel, you can subscribe to that YouTube channel. We're in pursuit of 5,000 YouTube subscribers by the end of the NBA season. I think we're about 300-ish short now, so you could do your best to help us there by subscribing to the YouTube channel, and of course liking and circulating this video in the content feed, as we're trying to incorporate more of these episodes onto the YouTube feed as well. So appreciate all the support there. If you're interested in any of our content behind the paywall, you can check out establishedrun.com/subscribe-MBA for more details about our premium product offerings at Established Run.
All right, great stuff. Shout out to producer Ryan, producer Luke. You guys are the best. I'll catch you guys next time.